The title of the lecture that I'm going to be giving today is 14 to 19 Developments, which is rather a broad title, but the aim within this is to look at the context of 14 to 19 education, think about some of the issues among learners within that area, to look at the curriculum offer that is in place for 14 to 19, and to think about some issues arising from that. The lecture today is for the secondary PGCE students who are doing a one-year full-time course. Good morning, I'm delighted to be here. As a starting point, I'd like you to think about your experiences on the PGCE to date. And think about, is there a particular year group that you've been working with that you found more challenging than some others? And it may be that the year group's challenging or the specific class is challenging because of their behaviour. It might be because of their motivation or whatever. The first part of the lecture is really challenging the students to try and think around issues related to disaffection, so that they can really think about why the 14 to 19 curriculum is important. What are some of the issues within the curriculum offer at the moment that cause young people to become disengaged with education, as a context for thinking about what might be important in developing a new curriculum offer. Just take a moment to think about, if I had to identify one year group that I perceive to be more challenging than others, which year group would it be? All of those of you who have found year 7 to be the most challenging, can you raise your hands? Okay, year 8. That's quite a few, isn't it? Year 9. Whoa. Year 10 and year 11. That's not so surprising. So what you're saying about finding students perhaps in year 9 and year 10 challenging concurs with quite a lot of the literature from different countries. The figures here are quite spectacular, I think. You know, a student drops out of mainstream education in the USA every 9 seconds. And what we also find is that the rates of disaffection vary in different communities, particularly high amongst minority students, in urban areas. And there's been an increase in rates of exclusion from school across the UK, USA, and Australia. And it is important to think about this, because the longer-term consequences for young people who drop out of education are poor. There are links between truancy, exclusion, and crime. Success in school can act as a protective factor, particularly for boys aged 12 to 16. Research with those in prison has demonstrated that they are 10 times as likely to have truanted. And the Audit Commission, this is going back to 1996, reported that 65% of young offenders had been excluded or truanted regularly. There are also costs in terms of community cohesion, employability, and long-term life consequences. So why is it that disaffection is such a challenge? I've given you some examples here from different countries, but they are saying and carrying the same main message, really. Students perceive there's a mismatch between the academic curriculum that they see at school and their interests. There's a sense that the traditional school curriculum is unrelated to their lived experiences. And what we know within the UK is that pupils' enjoyment and motivation decreases as they move through key stages 3 and 4. In practical terms, many students regard GCSEs as inappropriate. They think they lack relevance, and in some cases it's this that leads to disaffection, underachievement, and truancy. There are concerns that the curriculum is too rigid a sense that it's overloaded in terms of content, and that pupils might benefit from a more even balance between the development of academic and social skills. There are also perceived difficulties from the student perspective about the formality of the curriculum, the prescription of the curriculum, and the emphasis on literacy and continuous assessment. Especially at Key Stage 4, the curriculum depresses students' interests and demotivates them. They are turned off by education. So just taking this notion of disaffection a little bit further, have a look at the following question and decide whether you're going to vote for option A, B, or C. There are no prizes, I'm afraid. So, off we go. Option A. Nobody thinks it's option A, okay. Option B. A handful. Option C. It is option C. And if we broaden the age range to think about 18 to 24-year-olds, the figures are quite staggering and up more than 100,000 than the year previously. And this does relate to inclusive education. It does relate to engaging young people, because the longer-term consequences can be poor. The second part of the lecture is encouraging the students to think about the curriculum offer in terms of exactly what's on offer for young people today. So the PGCE students here will be completely familiar with GCSEs and A-levels, but probably less familiar with the notion of the foundation learning tier and also the apprenticeship. So as we start to focus thinking about the 14 to 19 offer, I wonder what you think counts as an educated 19-year-old in 2010 and beyond. Have your thoughts about this been influenced by your teaching placement? Do you find your views changing? What do you think the curriculum offer might be? And what about the education that takes place out of school? Leisure groups, community settings, music, performance, theatre, dance, a whole host of activities. Discuss in small groups what you think are the key components needed in education for young people.
Students have been pushed down the BTEC route because they get, more GCSEs. So we're not thinking about the students, we're thinking about the school. So we're being selfish about the whole thing. Just the whole structure, as you said, is totally wrong.
In the school I worked in, they have got like the option for having that where it's a sort of diploma training where you get 4 GCSE qualifications at the end of it. And they feel like they're going to achieve if they are going down that route rather than going down GCSEs, which they think that they're going to fail.
So, would some people like to share some thoughts?
Basically, we had a discussion and we were talking about how if we gave 19-year-olds or people of that age group a relevant option that they could take on that would give them the stuff they needed for their life experiences, they might be more willing to learn in that sense. So we were thinking if they could have some courses that would be really relevant to not being in education, but still getting by as a member of society, then maybe they might be more interested.
That's really thoughtful. Are there any other comments? Yes, sis.
Basically, we found that even with courses that are relevant, there are diplomas and BTECs that are relevant to the real world. They lack perseverance, because I think that even I lack the diligence that my parents' generation had, just because everything's easier. So it's about instilling in them the ethic of hard work and perseverance and the ability to work independently.
That's really helpful. And I think what we're going to do as part of the journey today is see whether the reforms within the 14 to 19 age range make a contribution in terms of the points that you've just made. So, what's on offer? GCSEs, A-level, they've been revised, controlled coursework conditions. There's an attempt to make the curriculum more relevant, broader number of subjects, vocational offers. We have apprenticeships, the foundation learning tier, the diploma, and we still have BTEC qualifications and NVQs. It's quite a complex pathway in some ways. The main offers really from 2010 at age 14 will be to follow the red line, looking at taking GCSEs. Also an option is to look at the foundational higher diplomas, and that could be alongside GCSEs. And a further option is thinking about the foundation learning tier. Moving on towards 16, the options increase in terms of whether I might want to undertake some employment with training, whether I might wish to engage in an apprenticeship, and higher levels of study in terms of the advanced diploma A-level options. And then at 18, moving on to higher education, further education, employment. It's going to be really important that you as teachers understand these different pathways, because part of your role will be in enabling the young people that you teach to take the most appropriate pathway that hopefully they will be successful in, will be motivated, and to take the point raised a minute ago, they will be challenged and motivated to persevere. So what do some of these offers look like? I'm not going to talk about GCSEs or A-levels because I'm sure you know far more than I do on both of those areas. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time just thinking about the apprenticeships, which you may not be so familiar with, but in terms of thinking about advice and guidance for those aged 16, it's going to be important that everyone involved in secondary education has some sense of how these work, the utility, access, and whether this might be the most appropriate pathway for a young person. There's been quite a drive to increase the number of apprenticeships and the range and depth of apprenticeships. There's a new online vacancy matching service, and important in thinking about the longer term 14 to 19 curriculum, apprenticeships will continue to include existing qualifications such as NVQs, BTECs. Apprenticeships will be offered at level 2, which is the same as 5 A to C grades at GCSE. There will also be an advanced apprenticeship, which is set at level 3, which is similar to A-levels. What's been an important aspect of the 14 to 19 reform is really trying to find different progression routes so that different pathways exist that enable learners to gain high-level qualifications without necessarily being restricted to an A-level route. So the advanced apprenticeship can lead towards a foundation degree or an honours degree, and is therefore providing an alternative route into higher education. These are the main broad areas. So if we think about arts, media and publishing, and look at the creative apprenticeship. The creative apprenticeship itself splits into different pathways. So there's a whole wealth of opportunities on offer here for 16 to 24-year-olds to train for a career in the creative and cultural industries. And to take you down to the sort of final tier, I've listed on this slide the career paths in terms of the music apprenticeship. So highly focused on a specific career, learning the skills, developing the experience in these different areas. And it might be that this does have the potential to re-engage some young people who struggle perhaps with what might be perceived as a more traditional curriculum. Foundation learning tier. This is of direct relevance to all of you in secondary education. What the Foundation Learning Tier offers is an attempt to work with young people, 14, 15, who are not yet ready to work at level 2. So the Foundation Tier is working at level 1, which, as I've indicated here, is below grades A to C, and below level 1 itself. And it's trying to provide a curriculum offer that will be more tailored to the needs of young people, that they gain recognition for this, and that it will enable progression. So in terms of thinking about a program, there's a sense that learners have some input in their learning. They agree with their tutors an individual learning plan, and that includes their starting point and ideally their destination, where they might want to progress to. And these programs integrate vocational, subject learning, personal and social development, functional skills. So quite a rounded offer. Lots of learner support, and as part of the offer, real attention paid to providing the young person with information, advice and guidance to enable them to progress to level 2. Also, what I find positive is the idea that learning is in smaller chunks. I remain a little bit concerned that most of the learning across 14 to 19 is still large chunks of learning. Yes, we might have modular A-levels and that type of thing, but in essence you're working for 2 years to gain a qualification or 2 years to gain your GCSE. And if you think perhaps of some of the students who may be more challenging in your classroom, who are a bit disaffected with education, not feeling that they're succeeding very well, it's really important that they get some recognition early on for their success, rather than trying to maintain that motivation over a 2-year period. A while ago, I did some research into an alternative curricular program run by Skillforce, which was a Ministry of Defence initiative at that time. And it sat alongside the curriculum for Year 9 pupils, so they did some time in school, but actually they spent 2 days a week probably working with Skillforce. And it was a very, very different curriculum. Lots of practical activities, Duke of Edinburgh, ASDAN Awards, community work, reflective logs, that type of thing. But what was important is that it was the aim of this programme that within 6 weeks of starting, the young people gained a certificate. And for these young people, it was extraordinary. This was probably the first time in their lives that they'd actually got a certificate that said, I can do something, I have succeeded, I've got something to be positive about. They'd had lots and lots of people telling them, you can't, you're not trying hard enough, you will not pass this. But the motivation of that success at that early stage was hugely important in engaging them and spurring them on to do other things. So my hope would be that if the Foundation Learning Programme, structures things in manageable chunks so that young people can achieve success, then it may enable progression to level 2. There are some specific challenges in the nature of the learners, the profile of the learners that may be involved within the Foundation Learning Tier, and I've listed some of those just for clarity. If I'm using the term spiky profile, it's really about a learner who's got different levels of skill in an overall area. So, for instance, their individual literacy skills, such as reading and writing, may be at very, very different levels. So challenges for those involved with the Foundation Learning Tier are thinking about how do you really personalise that programme so it meets the needs of the individual learner? How may this link to long-term aspirations in terms of employability? It's likely that a number of learners will have specific educational needs, that they are disengaged with mainstream education, and a whole host of things. The third part of the lecture today is probably the most substantive aspect of the lecture, in that there's a real focus on trying to unpack the diplomas in terms of the lines of learning, the delivery plan, and the elements that make up this composite award.
So, this is what you've all been waiting for, the diplomas. The diplomas sit at the heart of the 14 to 19 reforms. They were the main response to the Tomlinson report, and despite some of the ideas put forward in that report, there wasn't a response from the government in terms of bringing A-levels and GCSEs into a single framework. And I'm not here today to debate policy. But the main aims of the reforms in trying to think about the diploma were to increase the levels of post-16 participation, improve the quality of learning, and really to provide a very, very different offer to young people from age 14 onwards that might engage them in education and might be more relevant to their lived experiences. The diplomas have a very, very different structure from A-levels, BTECs, other qualifications, both in terms of the makeup of them and also the focus. So the focus of the diplomas is to enable a young person to develop and understand a broad basis of knowledge about the sector or related sectors that the diploma is based in. They have a specific focus in terms of, say, construction and the built environment, hair and beauty, finance, public services, travel and tourism. So they're linked to particular sectors of industry. And within that, all the diplomas also have opportunities to enable young people to add wider experience within the context of the diploma. So there are options to follow other subject areas or to widen the experience relating to your sector. All of the diplomas have three main components. Also underpinning the diploma is the notion of planning and review, that throughout the whole journey there are lots of opportunities for young people to think about their progress, to plan and to review. All of the diplomas come with an entitlement of a minimum of 10 days work experience in that particular sector, and they are also composite awards, but qualifications in their own right. Because there are different aspects of learning, principal, generic, additional specialist, you might be taking a broad range of qualifications. So you will gain those individual qualifications. If you're successful at all levels of the diploma, then you're awarded the title of a diploma. Initially, there are 14 original lines and based at levels 1, 2, and 3, which they've called Foundation, Higher, and Advanced. What's also interesting about the diploma, and I think provides a challenge for all of us here, is that many of them are being delivered by consortia. So when the diplomas were announced, schools, colleges were allowed to put in bids for specific diploma lines in groups. So you might have an FE college leading on the diploma linked to some secondary schools. You might have a sixth form college working with some secondary schools. You could have schools working by themselves. But partly because of the nature of the curriculum areas on offer, sometimes schools themselves simply don't have the physical equipment that people might need in terms of, different types of industries. So there are challenges with the diploma which will be very different from A-levels, BTECs, in that you might find yourself teaching, yes, I'm employed by the secondary school, but for part of my time, I'm going to be working in that FE college. And then there are issues there in thinking about, well, how do students move around? How do we sort the timetable out? And a whole host of things. So if we're thinking about students in year 10 and 11, generally they'll spend a couple of days on diploma study and the rest on doing GCSEs. So the diplomas sit alongside the GCSEs. When we move to year 12 and above, students will spend most of their time focusing on the diploma. But as we'll see in a few moments, that might include an A-level. So the generic learning, emphasis on functional skills, but a whole emphasis on other sort of more personal skills in terms of thinking about developing the capacity to work effectively in a team. How do I learn to manage my own learning? How do I become more independent? How do I think about my learning and reflect on it and plan my progression route? And there's a whole host of emphasis on personal learning and thinking skills, which starts to provide a broader offer and actually might enable a young person to develop and think about notions of perseverance, independence, planning, taking responsibility for their own learning. Hopefully, addressing some of the issues that young people raise in terms of the level of prescription in the curriculum and the formality. Much of the work in the diplomas is based on projects. You may be wondering about why this emphasis on functional skills. But functional skills are being thread through all qualifications. They're a replacement for key skills, they're part of the apprenticeship frameworks, part of foundation learning, they're part of all the diplomas. You might take the approach that surely by the time people are working, for GCSEs, diplomas, age 14, 15, 16, 17, you would have thought they had sufficiently developed functional skills. I'm going to ask you a question. What percentage of children leave primary schools, this is in England, without the basic skills in reading? And I'm talking here about basic skills in reading. I am not talking about whether they have achieved the appropriate level in their SATs. So, option A. Few people. Option B. Yes, substantially more. Option C. Okay. It's 6%. And it's just to put in context this sense of why functional skills are so important. To sort of take us back a little bit to the start of the session when we were thinking about disaffection. I remember doing some research into looking at behaviour and attendance in schools. And I was interviewing a year 9 lad, and he seemed, a nice lad. And he was talking about how he'd ended up being excluded from school. And he said, well, it was an English lesson, and the teacher asked me to stand up and read to the rest of the class as we were going round reading out loud. And from his perspective, there were 2 choices. The first is, I try and read, but I know I can't, and I make a complete fool of myself in front of my friends. The second choice is that I kick off, because then I don't have to do it. He chose the second choice. And there are real issues, and you may have seen this in terms of your teaching placements, with children in secondary school who can't access your curriculum because they do not have sufficient skills in reading and writing. There have been some questions about breadth and depth across different diplomas. In the Creative and Media diploma, it's a requirement at level 3 that students demonstrate competence in 2 disciplines, possibly 3. So it may be that I'm there as a musician, but I'm going to demonstrate competence in photography as well, or drama. There are some concerns about whether the breadth is at the expense of depth. I can choose to take another qualification as part of my diploma package. So if I'm doing it at level 2, I can bring in a particular GCSE. If I'm doing it at level 3, I could decide to broaden my portfolio and take an A-level, take a BTEC. And I think there are some real positives about the portfolio of offers that are in place now. To me, it looks as if it's a more inclusive system. There are greater opportunities for learner choice, greater opportunities, if it all works, for progression. I think what's also healthy is that the diplomas in particular are looking for partnership between different providers, different organisations, different workplaces. And we're offering a broader curriculum to young people that might match more what they hope to do within their lives. However, there were further developments that were announced in 2007. 3 new diploma lines: humanities, languages, and science. Quite different from the lines of learning that we've just been looking at. Also in autumn 2007, there was an announcement that the school leaving age was to rise. I'd like you to spend a few moments just reflecting on why you think those new lines were introduced. Do you think it's a helpful offer? And what do you think some of the ramifications will be of the increase in the school leaving age? It would be really helpful if some of you felt brave enough to volunteer a few comments.
Within individual schools, there's a kind of tension between the types of students who do A-levels and GCSEs, and the students who will choose things like media, BTECs, and stuff like that. And I think what this scheme, by including those 3 subjects, is doing, it's saying, well, no, everyone can study anything under this scheme. It doesn't need to be only these kind of middle-of-the-range students.
What I know from colleges and schools where the diploma has been implemented is that very different cohorts of students have been asked, suggested, encouraged to take the diploma. So for instance, I know of one local authority in London where there's a consortium of schools running the diploma who elected to run each of one of the new lines of learning from last September, but targeted specifically able students who might normally have followed a whole portfolio of GCSEs because they perceive the diploma to be challenging. Having said that, I also know of a FE college in London who's running the sort of creative and media diploma in conjunction with some schools. And what they found is actually the schools have used it to move out some of those challenging students at GCSE level to the college and say you cope with those, they're doing the diploma. So that's 2 very, very different approaches. Neither necessarily will be successful. But I think your point about opening up opportunities is healthy and inclusive. There were yet more developments when this whole notion of extended diplomas were announced to provide more challenge. And you might like to reflect individually about why you think the extended diplomas were announced. Was there a particular area of education that these might be trying to encourage to implement diplomas, particularly when they might be worth 4.5 A-levels?
The final part of the lecture is to think about some of the issues and concerns in terms of trying to implement qualifications such as the diploma that require schools and colleges to work together in ways that they may not have done before.
Although I spoke positively about the foundation learning tier, it hasn't as yet really been integrated into progression to the diploma, apprenticeships, different pathways. And I think more work might have been done on actually integrating that provision. We've got a real emphasis on qualifications above level 2, and I do hope that students working at levels below that are given a full offer. There are concerns in terms of the accessibility of the diplomas. The aim is that any young person in any part of the country should be able to take any diploma at whatever level, regardless of where they are. Given there are sort of work experience issues, the links with employment and sectors, that may well be a real challenge in some rural parts of the country. Will it really be possible for all these different lines of learning to be available for all young people? And will it engender some conflict between different institutions who are competing for students in very challenging economic circumstances? There are some very practical problems in thinking about the diplomas. So I've got my 14 or 15-year-old who's embarked on the diploma, really excited about it. How do they get around in that local authority? How do they move from school to college? Who's going to track that potentially disaffected student to ensure that, yes, they are at the school and then they are at the college and they are in the workplace? There are also issues for young people when they need to work in different arenas that have very different modes of operating. Things that are required in one environment may not be required in another. There may be different ways of operating, different ways of being, different ways of talking with staff. Sometimes when things go wrong for young people, it's because of real inconsistencies. Inconsistencies in expectations. So one of the challenges will be to think about how are all of these things put in place so that the young people understand the parameters in which they're working. I still wonder whether there are some issues about children who are particularly disaffected learners and whether this curriculum offer will be sufficient. Although the diplomas have got a sort of vocational programme, quite a lot of the work will still be based in the classroom for a number of those diplomas. Projects will still require written work. In order to gain the full diploma, if I'm working at level 2, I have to have passed the functional skills element in maths, English and ICT. There are also a whole host of questions in terms of legal requirements, in loco parentis issues, travel arrangements, as I've said, protocols between institutions, and a whole host of health and safety issues. If I think about some young people who have spent part of their time in colleges looking at catering, as an example, most of them are not entitled through health and safety reasons to use 80% of the equipment. So at the start of this session, we spent some time thinking about what counts as an educated 19-year-old in 2010 and beyond. What I didn't talk about at that time was also 3 things that I think are important in terms of the 14 to 19 agenda and in terms of the wider context of society and education as a whole. The first is about community cohesion. Is this 14 to 19 offer going to help enhance community cohesion? How does it link with Every Child Matters in terms of how does the curriculum offer reflect each of the characteristics of Every Child Matters? And one thing which you may find yourself wondering about as you embark on your teaching career is what's the role of the teacher? What might be your role in terms of pastoral support, information, advice, guidance, thinking about young people moving across different locations, the different number of subject levels that you might be teaching? And I have a sense that actually the role of the teacher is changing and becoming more broad. And finally, some questions. I wonder whether the policy context is clear. I wonder about the school leaving age and whether we've got the right products. I wonder how we're going to enhance school and FE links. What happens for those institutions who will have to wait before they can deliver the diploma? Is the financing clear in terms of following the pupil? And I also have a sense that achievement at age 16 still determines quite heavily the next phase. And if we're trying to look at a 14 to 19 offer, why is achievement at 16 so pivotal? Thank you very much.
I think one of the most important things about the session today is encouraging the PGCE students to think how critical the curriculum is in engaging young people in education.